Well, yesterday Parliament also released a statement condemning actions by the EFF members of Parliament supported by other EFF members here in the parliamentary precinct. First of all, those MPs were evicted from the House after they prevented President Jacob Zuma from continuing with his question and answer session here. And that is also when some of those members took to the parliamentary precinct supported by the EFF supporters and caused some damage here to the infrastructure here at Parliament. We've also now learned from the Western Cape SAPS that a case of malicious damage to property has been opened. They do not want to go into any further detail with regard to that, simply saying that the investigation is ongoing and that they cannot single out any individuals with regard to that. Now, we've heard also yesterday from EFF leader Julius Malema saying that the EFF won't back down, and if Parliament wants to arrest them for holding President Jacob Zuma to account, they can continue to do so. So yesterday we also saw the riot police then deployed here in the parliamentary precinct, and after a while the EFF leaders then left the precinct on their own. We also now know that they have been suspended for 5 days. But yes, indeed. But for more on that, we're joined now by the Democratic Alliance Chief Whip, John Steenhuisen. John, always a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you so much for joining me. What is the reaction from the Democratic Alliance in terms of what transpired here in Parliament yesterday?
Well, I think it's a terrible shame that our Parliament has been reduced from a chamber that should be debating the issues that matter most to people at home, the massive joblessness, the economy that's spiraling out of control, the drought that's driving up the basic cost of foodstuffs for ordinary citizens. None of that was on the agenda yesterday. None of it got dealt with. What we saw, though, was a wrestling chamber instead. Now, obviously, this escalation of violence, I don't believe, is in the interests of the people of South Africa. And certainly, I think, given the tensions existing in places like Vuwani, where we're seeing public infrastructure being damaged to make a point, I think when it happens in Parliament, it sets the wrong model for the rest of the nation. Basically saying there are no other ways of hearing your voices other than destroying public infrastructure. I think this is a very dangerous message. I think it's a very unfortunate message because it won't resolve the key issues that face us in South Africa.
And what's the position of the DA when it comes to the costs? Obviously, there's repairs that's now having to be made in terms of that. What's your point on that?
Well, I think there's a broader point to be made that there have to be consequences when public infrastructure is damaged. Huge amounts of public money get spent on building places like Parliament, clinics, schools, in order to ensure that our democracy continues. When that is damaged, we believe that those responsible for the damage must be held accountable on a user pays basis. So yesterday's damage by the EFF members and their supporters, the bill should be sent to them to recover. I don't think it's fair that the South African taxpayer should be held liable for the implementation of the political strategy of the EFF here in Parliament.
And John, also we saw how this story also latched on now by international media houses. What do you think that this means for the image of South Africa in light of the fact that we saw Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan going overseas to try and create this impression of a South Africa that is under control and very much trying to avert a negative credit rating? What do you think it means for the image of South Africa?
Well, let me be clear. The biggest impediment against the good image of South Africa is President Jacob Zuma himself. He is the one, through his actions and inaction, that has cast this country into the crisis it finds itself in by his disregard for the law, his failure to uphold the Constitution. But I certainly don't think that the scenes played out on international news yesterday of our Parliament in crisis, our Parliament burning, our schools burning, our clinics burning, is the type of image we want to be projecting to the rest of the world when we're desperate for foreign direct investment, we're desperate for investor confidence, and we want the ratings agency not to downgrade us because it's going to drive up the cost of borrowing dramatically, which means there's going to be less money spent on the issues and areas that we need it most to be spent on, the people in South Africa that need it the most.
In closing, John, what other methods do you think the EFF can use to hold President Zuma to account?
Well, I think they have to decide, are they in Parliament or are they outside of Parliament? If you're in Parliament, you use the parliamentary mechanisms and the rules. And I'll be the first to admit that there needs to be a deep structural reform of how this Parliament holds the executive accountable. It's very clear from the Concord judgment that what has been happening is not working. But you can't do that from the inside if you're trying to break in from the outside as well. They should be part of a constructive engagement engagement about how we amend the rules of Parliament, how we drive those deep structural reforms, they should get behind the DA's idea of an Executive Accountability Act, where there will actually be legal consequences for ministers who do not live up to their constitutional mandate to account to this House.
John, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Shante, there you've heard it from the Democratic Alliance Chief Whip, John Steenhuisen, giving us his sentiments as well as that of the Democratic Alliance when it comes to the events that unfolded here in Parliament yesterday. Back to you.